Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 3 in numbers. This will be covering dates. Now, if you've ever used spreadsheet software before and seen like something in the 45,000 or just some odd end things, dates can be especially tricky to grasp and understand. But once when you go through like in the video like this, you should be able to really understand how it's stored and what it is in the spreadsheet program, and then be able to troubleshoot and work on it from there. Now, to start off with, dates are actually stored as numeric numbers and they're formatted as dates. So that means that every day equals 1. So one day is 1. If you're looking at how many days have passed and it's 2, it's going to see that as 2 dates. Now, just because there's the 2 there doesn't mean that, okay, we'll take whatever number you have and then add 2 with it. Really, it means that each day is set there and they have assigned a specific day at day 0, day 1, 2, and so on. And so in Google Sheets, if you put a 1 and you try to format it as a date, so go to Format, Number, Date, it's going to convert it to this date here, which is December 31st, 1899. And that is what number 1 is. And from that point in time, and I'm just going to undo this, if you add another to it, or you put a 2, then it's going to be 1-1-1900. A 3 is 1-2-1900. And from that point in time, it's going to continue on, and every day is going to get a new number added to it. So if you're watching this pretty recently, we're going to be in the 45,000s. So right now, this date here, which is the today, and that's a function that just pulls whatever the date is when you open the sheet, that day is actually day number 45,508. And that is how that day is stored. With that, you'd be able to calculate and know, well, what would be the number to this date plus 10? Well, that would be 45,518, and so on. And that's a way that we'll know as we look towards the future, there are going to be new numbers that will be assigned to those dates. And if you can understand that, important concept, dates will become a lot easier. So you might have worked with a data set where you insert numbers, and some of the numbers, for whatever reason, look like dates, and they're in like the 1900s or things like that. Depending on how they're formatted, can make a drastic difference. So if you take this row, for example, and you go to formatting and you just switch it to dates when it's supposed to be times or supposed to be numbers, these look significantly different than if you just push undo these numbers here. Now, I did leave a note, and it is important to note that Excel actually starts 1 as 1-1-1900, and it actually doesn't do negatives. So dates before that are not actually stored within Excel like it is in Google Sheets. And I wanted to make that clear because it is a big difference between the two programs. And while they're similar in a lot of ways, that one, it is a little different. There are ways to kind of get around that and make that, but just a heads up. Now, in any number, just like dates, if it is not formatted at all, like you did not switch the alignment, if it is truly stored as a number date like this, it's going to be on the right side of the column. If it's stored as text, so if you go to Format, Number, and then Plain Text, it will be on the left side. So that is a very good way to indicate how it is stored. From here, if you remove some of the stuff, while it does change the value of it and how it looks, it will not affect it as much as it would with the other ones. Another way to tell if it's actually formatted as a date is if you click in with 2 clicks, it'll actually bring up a calendar and show the different dates. I'm just going to press undo to get it back formatted as a date. So if we're using this and we understand that they are as numbers, it becomes a little bit easier to actually add, subtract, and do those different things. Like we looked at in currency, we have this table, and you can add, you could subtract, multiply, divide, and typically with looking at dates, going to add or subtract, things like that would be what it is. For example, maybe you have a start date and you want to find when the end date is. If you have a certain number, of days that it'll be, so duration, and we'll look a little bit more onto all of these, but let's say the start date is today, and if you use command and then semicolon, you'll get today's date. Say we want the duration to be 3 days. Now, one thing in mind that is very important is as you're using formulas like this, while it is helpful to say 3 days, it is not best to use that, because if you try and add 3 days to this, as it is now, you'll need to add an additional step, which pulls the number. Whereas if you just remove that and now it's a number, then you can add and subtract. So saying duration in days would help. What you can do is you can simply go and start a function, do that one, add a plus sign, and then the 3. If you push enter, you can see now that we have the end date, and that is going to be in 3 days. Now, if you switch this to 10 days, you can see that that continues to update. Say you use 1,000 days, it'll increase into that there. Now, if you switch all of this number format, and if you use Control Shift and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can actually change the values a few different ways. So number 1 is going to be numbers, 2 is going to be time, 3 is dates. So here, it doesn't make as much sense, because what you're doing is you're adding this to this one. However, now that we know that all of these are stored as numbers, it does make sense outside of adding a date plus another date. Typically doesn't happen. So you can see here, this is the date number 45,508, and this is 1,000. And then that would equal this number. So if we just switch this one, Control Shift 3, that makes much more sense to us humans. Whereas again, how it's stored within this as the number, it's going to be that 45 something thousand number. Now that we have this concept, the rest of the date and time formats make sense, but it still takes a little bit of time of what you should actually use in order to do those different functions. What I mean by that is that 1 is always a day. And if you take that 1 and split it, just like you would with any other fractions, that's how you get time. Again, we're going to look into that a lot more in the next one. But really, if you know, okay, 1 equals a day, the duration of a day, divided by 24, that's what an hour is stored. I also wanted to open this table up. I've showed you a couple of hotkeys, but here are a few other ones that you might find useful in your instance. For example, you can do insert time by doing command or control plus shift plus the colon, and that'll be the time. If you want the date, command, and then the semicolon. Finally, if you want date and time, command option shift or alt control shift the semicolon. And those are all very helpful in what you are trying to do. Like if you're adding the timestamp to something, you can do that instead of trying to, write this entire long character out. Other functions that do the similar thing, and again, we'll look at them more with the date and time functions, is the equal now. And you just have the open close parentheses. And you can do equal today, as I showed a little bit earlier. Those will get those. Now, they are volatile, they'll change, and so depending on what you're wanting, if you want it to stop at an exact time, you will want to do this one, because let's say if I'm just pushing the delete key, the now, you'll see the seconds are increasing. And that's what the today is doing in the background, it's just not showing them. Now, one last thing before we go into the time, and it does pertain to that a little bit more. As you store numbers and dates, depending on how you do it, you can actually change it. This one here is the now, and it has the timestamp, and this one does not. If you go to Format, Numbers, and you change it to Date and Time, you can see this one has the time at the end. This one does not. So this one really is just the date, because it's just a full number with no decimals, nothing. Whereas this one up here has both the date and the time. Similarly, if you switch it to just time, you can show just what that is. This one shows 12 a.m., which is stored as a 0, and that's again because it's a whole number. Finally, if we switch this to just the date, they will look identical, but actually they are slightly different if you go to the numbers. You can see here that they have the same whole numbers, which would be that date in the calendar year, but this one has a 0.55, and that is what's showing the time. The time is the actual fraction of that day, and again, 24 hours makes sense that a little more than halfway is around 1 o'clock something p.m. So I'm just going to go back to the format and put it as date to time, and there again, that's kind of how those work. I did explain a lot of what the time does in this, but we'll go into more detail in this next video. So thank you for watching. Be sure to do those YouTube things like share, subscribe, whatever. We appreciate the interactions, and see you in the next one. Bye now.